The bustling sounds of a busy airport echoed through the terminal as travelers rushed through security, chatted in crowded lounges, and lined up at gates, eager to board their flights. The sharp scent of coffee filled the air, mingling with the distant hum of overhead announcements. The usual rhythm of the place was disrupted, however, when a lone figure appeared at the check-in counter. A homeless man, his clothes ragged and stained, stood in stark contrast to the polished, well-dressed passengers around him. His shoes were worn and his face unshaven, his hair wild and tangled. He shuffled slowly, his every step tentative as he tried to blend into the crowd, though it was impossible. His faded, oversized jacket hung loosely on his frame, and the bag he clutched looked like it had seen better days. A faint smell of the street clung to him, but it was clear from the way he kept his head down that he was trying to remain invisible. His gaze flicked up briefly, his eyes meeting the sharp stares of a few nearby passengers. A sense of discomfort washed over him, and he instinctively pulled his coat tighter around himself, shoulders hunched. He could feel the judgment in the air, even if no one said a word. Each step toward the check-in counter felt like a struggle, and as he neared, his hesitation grew. He wasn't used to this, being in places where people seemed to have everything together. As the homeless man stepped up to the check-in counter, the young staff woman behind it immediately noticed him. She exchanged a quick glance with another employee, her expression turning to one of subtle distaste. She barely looked at him as she forced a smile and greeted him with a tone that was anything but friendly. The moment he mentioned his flight, her eyes scanned him quickly, taking in his unkempt appearance. "You're not going to be able to board," she said, her voice cool and matter-of-fact. "You don't meet the cleanliness standards required for passengers." The man blinked, a look of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "I have a ticket. I'm just trying to get home." His voice faltered, caught off guard by the harshness in her words. But the staff woman didn't budge. She shook her head, her expression hardening. "Sorry, but that's our policy. You're not allowed to board looking like that." He tried to explain further, fumbling for his ticket. "I can pay for an upgrade, anything. Please. I really need to get on this flight." She cut him off dismissively. "There's nothing to be done. I suggest you clean up before attempting another flight." The man's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but his desperation grew. His hands shook as he clutched the ticket tighter, trying to make sense of the cruel rejection. Around him, the whispers started, growing louder. A few nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads in judgment, while others looked on in discomfort. The man's heart sank as the whispers became more pointed. The humiliation was unfolding, and he felt more invisible than ever. The homeless man stepped back from the counter, his shoulders slumped, a heavy weight pressing down on him. His eyes, though tired and weary, betrayed a deep, unspoken pain. He had experienced rejection before, so much so that it had become almost routine. But no matter how many times it happened, it still stung. The shame, the judgment, the sense of being less than human. As he stood there, a silent moment passed, the words of the staff member still echoing in his ears. His gaze flicked to the floor, avoiding the eyes of the passengers around him, who continued to watch the scene unfold with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. But it wasn't their whispers that mattered to him. It was the shame of not being seen for who he truly was. The man's mind drifted for a moment to a time long before the street had become his home. He remembered a different life, one where he had been someone's son, someone loved. There had been a family who depended on him, a job he took pride in, and a future he had looked forward to. He had once worn a crisp suit and traveled for work, speaking confidently in meetings and making plans for vacations with his family. But that life, the one filled with warmth and hope, had been torn apart by a series of unfortunate events. A failed business venture, the loss of a loved one, and a crippling illness had shattered his world. Each setback had chipped away at him, until there was nothing left but this. A man walking through the airport with the remnants of a life he couldn't quite remember. He exhaled deeply, his hands trembling slightly as he turned away from the counter. With his head lowered, he shuffled toward the exit, each step heavy with the weight of his own dignity slipping further away. He tried to hold on to the little he had left, but it was getting harder to keep his head up. A few moments passed as the homeless man sat in the corner of the waiting area, his head down, his worn bag resting at his feet. The buzz of the airport continued around him, with passengers rushing past, most too busy to even glance in his direction. He had become a shadow among the crowd, unnoticed by the people who were so absorbed in their own lives. His heart still ached, but the sting of humiliation was slowly being replaced by a quiet resolve. He was used to being invisible. Just as he gathered the strength to rise, a sudden announcement blared over the loudspeaker, cutting through the hum of the terminal. It was sharp and clear, drawing the attention of several passengers and staff alike. Attention, all airport staff. A private jet is arriving shortly for a high-profile passenger. Please prepare the VIP lounge and ensure all arrangements are made for their arrival. The words seemed to hang in the air, but the homeless man didn't flinch. He had heard such announcements countless times before, but this one seemed to carry an unusual weight. A few staff members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from routine focus to one of heightened anticipation. Without drawing attention to himself, the man slowly stood, his movements calm and deliberate. He adjusted his worn jacket, his eyes scanning the room as the announcement continued. He didn't seem in a hurry, he was simply taking his time, as if the arrival of the private jet didn't affect him in the slightest. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sleek, expensive-looking phone, a device far too sophisticated for someone in his current state. His fingers moved with ease as he tapped the screen and brought the phone to his ear. "I'll be there in a few minutes," he said softly, his voice low and composed. "Yes, everything's in order." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his bag, the motion casual, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. A few of the staff members, still busy preparing the lounge, glanced over at him in confusion. The homeless man, once again unnoticed by most, now made his way toward the VIP entrance with steady steps. The staff watched in disbelief as he moved effortlessly through the terminal, no longer blending into the crowd. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the man they had treated with disdain was now someone entirely different. The atmosphere outside the airport shifted as a sleek, black limousine pulled up to the entrance. The sound of its engine humming slowly faded, replaced by the unmistakable whoosh of the air as the tinted windows lowered slightly. A small entourage of well-dressed individuals exited the vehicle first, all sharply suited and professional, standing by with quiet precision. They moved aside to make way for the man they were there to meet, and the homeless man who had just moments ago been ignored, humiliated and dismissed, stepped into view. The staff inside the terminal froze. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they watched the man walk toward the limousine with purpose, his posture no longer slouched, but instead straight and confident. His worn coat no longer seemed to matter, his presence commanded the space, and for the first time, he seemed to radiate an air of authority that had eluded him moments earlier. One of the suited figures opened the door to the limousine, with a respectful gesture, stepping aside to let the man enter. "Mr. Weston, we've been waiting for you," the individual said, his voice calm but with a hint of reverence. The words hit the staff like a jolt of electricity. Mr. Weston. The name echoed in their minds. It took only a moment for the realization to settle in. The man they had treated like a nobody, the one they had turned away at the check-in counter, was someone of extraordinary importance. Mr. Weston was not just anyone. He was one of the wealthiest and most respected figures in the business world, a man whose name appeared in the news, whose philanthropic endeavors changed lives, and whose private life was kept under the radar, purposely hidden from the public eye. The homeless man, the one who had been humiliated just moments ago, now entered the limo with the ease of someone who had been accustomed to a life of privilege. The door closed behind him, and the entourage quickly followed, their movements efficient and respectful. As the limousine drove off, the staff stood frozen, unable to process what had just unfolded. The murmurs began almost immediately. "Was that really him?" one of the employees asked, his voice barely a whisper. Another nodded, her face pale. "How could we have not known? We treated him like he was nothing." A heavy silence fell over the terminal, as the staff who had been so quick to judge were now left to reflect on the magnitude of their mistake. They had failed to see what lay beneath the surface, their eyes clouded by prejudice. The reality of their actions hit them hard, and the weight of their misjudgment lingered in the air, leaving them all to contemplate the cost of their ignorance. Moments after the limousine had driven away, the staff still stood frozen in disbelief, their minds racing to process the shocking revelation. The atmosphere was thick with discomfort as they exchanged stunned glances. But it wasn't long before their manager, a middle-aged man with a stern face, approached them briskly. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the group, clearly aware of what had just transpired. "I've been informed about what happened," the manager said, his voice sharp and controlled. though there was a clear edge of disappointment in it. "You've made a huge mistake." The staff members shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence now replaced with a sense of guilt. They could feel the weight of their manager's gaze, knowing that they had misjudged someone who, it turned out, was far more than they had assumed. The manager continued, his tone growing more serious. "That man you treated with such disrespect. His name is Weston. Mr. Weston. He is one of the wealthiest and most respected individuals in the business world." He paused, letting the words sink in. "He lives a low-profile life, avoiding the public eye as much as possible, and his contributions to the community are immeasurable. He gives back anonymously, helping countless people without seeking recognition." The staff was silent, the reality of their actions sinking in as they processed the information. They had humiliated someone who had quietly changed the world for the better, someone whose humility had kept him from showing the world the true measure of his worth. "He chose to live incognito," the manager went on. "He's been living this way for personal reasons, trying to find peace away from the spotlight, and yet you treated him as if he were a nobody because of his appearance." The manager's voice took on a more lecturing tone. "This is a lesson, and one you all need to learn. Never judge anyone based on how they look, the clothes they wear, or the state they're in. Respect is something we owe everyone, no matter their status or appearance. You assumed far too much, and it's cost you dearly." The staff stood still, the weight of their actions pressing down on them. They had been so quick to judge, and now they had to live with the realization that their assumptions had been wrong and costly. The young staff woman, who had been particularly harsh toward the homeless man, stood in the back of the group, her face flushed a deep shade of red. The manager's words echoed in her mind as she replayed the scene in her head. She had been the one to dismiss him so easily, to judge him without a second thought. Now, as the reality of her actions settled in, she couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of guilt that gripped her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms, trying to hide the nervous fidgeting that betrayed her inner turmoil. She thought about how she had looked at him earlier, with disgust and annoyance, and how easily she had turned him away. The man had asked for nothing but to be treated with dignity, yet she had denied him that simple human courtesy. As she stood there, her mind wandered back to her upbringing, how she had been taught to judge people based on their appearance, to make assumptions about those who didn't fit into the mold of success. She had been raised in a world that praised status and wealth, and she had internalized that mindset without question. But now, seeing the consequences of her actions, she realized just how wrong she had been. The man wasn't the disgusting beggar she had imagined. He was someone of immense worth, someone who had quietly shaped the world in ways she could never have imagined. The other staff members, too, felt the weight of what had happened. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, all of them reflecting on how quickly they had allowed their prejudices to shape their actions. There was a collective sense of remorse that filled the space, as each of them came to the same painful realization: they had failed to show respect when it was most needed. They had learned a hard lesson about judgment, and it was one that would stay with them for a long time. As the staff stood in stunned silence, reflecting on their actions, a deeper truth began to settle in, a truth that had eluded them moments before. Appearances, as they had so quickly learned, could be deceiving. Society often judges people based on what is visible on the surface, without understanding the stories that lie beneath. In the fast-paced world we live in, it's far too easy to assume that those who appear down on their luck are less worthy, less important. But as this story had just revealed, such assumptions could not be further from the truth. The homeless man's departure in the sleek limousine was a powerful reminder that life can change in an instant. What seemed like a moment of failure for him, the moment when he was rejected and humiliated, was not the full picture of who he was. Beneath the shabby coat and the weary face was a man who had once known success, who had given generously, and who had made a significant impact on the world. The staff had judged him based on a snapshot of his life, but they had never seen the full story. This incident was a stark lesson: kindness and humility should always guide our actions. People should never be underestimated because of their current circumstances. A person's worth isn't defined by the state of their clothes or the shape of their bank account. We all have stories that shape us, and sometimes the greatest acts of strength come from those who appear weakest. The homeless man had reminded everyone that worth lies in more than what meets the eye, and that in a world full of judgments, we must choose to show kindness and respect to everyone, no matter how they appear. Thank you for watching this powerful story. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that we should always treat others with kindness, respect, and understanding, no matter their circumstances. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hidden in plain sight, and we never know their full story until we look beyond the surface. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Let us know what you think and how it made you feel. And if you want to see more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an inspiring moment. Let's spread kindness and never underestimate the people around us. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.